Welcome to my Mk2 Triumph Vitesse. We have chosen a glorious April morning. Sun's out. Temperature's not too bad today, so top down. And I thought it was a good day really to go out and explore some of Suffolk's twistier roads. And so we're actually on the A1120, and this is the route which runs from the A12 at Yoxford all the way through to mid-Suffolk, and it's known as the tourist route, but it's a nice road, and it takes us through one or two interesting villages. And at the moment we're just passing through the village of Sibton, and Sibton is sort of particularly well known for the Wilderness Project, which is one of three large estates owned by John Hunt, and it's really devoted for sort of upmarket holiday lets. But more importantly, there's been a huge amount of work in terms of conservation, conserving the large houses. So there's Cockfield Hall, Sibton Hall, and Helmingham Hall. Okay, always get that slightly mixed up with Helmingham, but Helmingham Hall. And these houses have been sort of brought back to their former glory, and the land itself has been reassessed. A lot of former arable land has been turned back to pasture. There's been a massive amount of tree planting, reinstitution of old hedgerows, and they sort of do a lot of sheep farming here as well. But it is very much a place where if you have enough money you can come and stay and sort of go back in time really and be away from the kind of stresses of modern life. But for the rest of us who live here, we get to enjoy the work that John Hunt and his team have done in really restoring some of this sort of countryside to the way it would have looked, well, 150 years ago, I guess. The village we're now coming into is a village called Peasenhall, and this is a village which was home to the Smythe, I think Smythe brothers, but certainly the family was the Smythes, and they in the 19th century were responsible for making a lot of agricultural machinery. So they had a little foundry here, and it's a well-served village. It's got post office stores. There's a wonderful delicatessen called Emmett's, which is particularly well known. I think it had royal patronage at one time. I think Princess Margaret was sort of thought to have been one of their customers. I need to look that up actually, but it has a wonderful selection of houses, some of them very early, some of them really going back to the 16th century, quite a bit of timber frame buildings, and then some later 17th and 18th century buildings. And then we get to the sort of Victorian era as well, which is when I think Smythes were at their zenith and obviously building houses for their workforce. We're literally just driving through it at the moment, and it's a good stopping off place if you want to sort of just grab a sandwich or something. If you're taking the route from, say, the back route from Cambridge to the Heritage Coast, then yeah, this is certainly somewhere to, you know, stop for a break. So we're just coming out of the village now, so I'll be able to put my foot down and whoops, just pop you back in there. I'm going to have to make a little adjustment to the camera here because it's just that's better. I think you're still with me now. So the road we're on, the A1120, it goes through quite a number of villages, so you have 30-mile-an-hour speed limits, but the bit we're on at the moment, we're at the national speed limit. And if you like to drive fast, it's a good route actually. Bit of undulation, some gentle bends, and as you can see, the road is reasonably empty. Obviously most of the traffic coming to East Suffolk comes down the A12, so the A1120 is a nice route to use if you're sort of either driving as we are at the moment at 60, or if you just want to sort of bootle along at 40 miles an hour, it's fine. You're not going to have a sort of queue of cars behind you. One tip, this is a Tuesday morning, and it is certainly true that sort of spring, summertime, the roads get much busier at weekends. So if you have the opportunity to come out sort of during the week, you'll get much better driving. Right, we're coming up to a village called Badingham here, and what passes for a hill in Suffolk, so out of overdrive and we'll just down into third. Take a spin. Also popular with motorcyclists. Very interesting thought about the Vitesse as a sports car, because technically that's not what it is. It was meant as a sort of high performance family car. Of course, a lot of them were saloons. They were used in motorsport in about 1962-63. And going back to a time when Graham Robson, who is a wonderful author and frankly the expert on the Triumph Mark, Graham was the manager of the Works rally team, and they had one season where they rallied 4 of the first Mark 1 1600 Vitesses. And I think one of the problems they had was that although the engines were brilliant and you know, the cars themselves I think were reasonably robust, the transmissions, the gearboxes just weren't up to the kind of punishment that something like the Tulip Rally or the Coup d'Alpe would exert on a car of that period. And the truth is they had really 2 other cars which were ideal for rallying. One of them was the Triumph 2000, which came out in '62, and of course that was a monocoque construction with trailing arm rear suspension. A big car and heavy, but certainly robust. But of course the car they really had was the TR4, and the TR4 really followed in the footsteps of its earlier siblings, the TR3 and TR2. And the TR4 had a much more robust gearbox and back end, and of course the early TRs didn't have independent rear suspension, so they were live axles, and I think they were just more reliable than the Vitesses. There is one which survived the 1960s and is still used, although there's some sort of debate about its authenticity, but the only other sort of Vitesse that I'm really aware of that sort of has done well in motorsport belonged to Kaz Kastner in America, and his Vitesse, you can Google it, known as the Candy Box, but that's really sort of motor circuit racing rather than rallying, and obviously, you know, I don't think it bears a great deal of resemblance to something like this, you know, in terms of the sort of the way the engine, transmission, brakes and stuff are set up. So in a way motorsport kind of passed the Vitesse by because of the TR4 and then later the TR5, which adopted the 6-cylinder engine. As a GT car, interesting. GT sort of makes me think of things like Aston Martin DB4s. I'm not quite in that league, but as a car to sort of go on long trips, enjoy A roads and B roads, this is just fine. And having the torque that this 6-cylinder engine puts out means that, you know, we're pretty flexible. I mean, we're in overdrive top at 40. I could probably do the whole journey just by flicking in and out of overdrive third if I wanted to. And again, you have to sort of remember this comes from an era when people didn't really like changing gear, so you know, the more flexible, more torquey a car was, the better it was. And of course they tended to be lower geared, because in '62, when the first Vitesse was produced, motorways were really in. Now we're coming to one of my favourite villages. Very, very pretty. Oh, you've gone. Yeah, so it's a YouTube channel just dedicated to old cars, really. That's all it is.
I love old cars. I think they're brilliant.
Well, you've got a very nice car, actually.
I'm
is it?
just the chauffeur.
Yeah, you're welcome to come and have a look if you want.
Sorry.
No, I do.
Look at this. I'm in enough, aren't I?
Yeah, you should be fine then.
This is so cool. Paintwork's pristine. Has this been redone? No.
Yeah, it has. To be honest, it was done probably about 20 years ago.
It has been done.
So this one's quite worn. I've got two actually. So the other one I've got is sort of much more concours and that's sort of immaculate. Yeah, so this is 1971.
Is that one water turn down there? Crap. Get through there. Oh, push it through.
Yeah, they can.
Sorry. Let me just pull the car up here.
Yeah, do that. And this is a really pretty Suffolk village, which again has its own butchers, pub and microbrewery, and beautiful architecture. Again, there's some houses from the 16th century, quite a lot from the 18th and 19th century as well, and examples of some thatched cottages which you may be able to see ahead of us. It sort of gives you a flavour of actually what Suffolk is really like. And again, another place you could stop off and have a cup of tea or grab a sandwich. There was a break while I was filming this. I had to pull over to reset the camera, and you might see it in the final edit, but the camera actually fell out of the holder or the camera mount, and it's the first time I've used this camera mount, so it's a bit of a work in progress. Anyway, I pulled in to reset it, and the car that was behind me pulled up. This very nice young woman got out called Vanessa and her mum Heather. So if you're watching, Vanessa and Heather, it was really nice to meet you both and have a chat. And Vanessa was explaining to me that she has a Mark V Volkswagen Golf, which is a fast appreciating classic, and she was telling me how much work she does on it herself, and that she spent a little bit of time working in the motor trade, but I think has found it quite difficult as a young woman working with men who assume that she doesn't have any practical knowledge when quite clearly she does, and she is a proper petrol head. And she was sharing with me her ambition, which is to get herself a 1950 Chevy pickup truck, but the most important thing about this car or this truck that she wants is the colour, and she wants it to be patinated, but she wants it to be yellow. And from what little I know, having met her, I'm absolutely certain she's going to achieve this ambition. She seems like a very determined young lady, and as I say, a real petrol head, and It's one of the great privileges of owning a car like this. You're always really a custodian rather than an owner, and I think it's incumbent upon us as custodians of these old cars to kind of share them with other people, and to, you know, to stop and chat to people. And I always come away learning something, you know, when I do engage with other people. And quite often, you know, what you hear is stories of, oh, you know, my dad used to own one of these, or my grandfather took me to school in a car like this. And old cars seem to bring so much joy to people. And I think it's one of the reasons why I really like getting out and driving these cars, rather than sort of keeping them, you know, locked up in a garage and only bringing them out, you know, to car shows. Yeah, yes, today's been sort of, you know, one of those affirmative occasions where, you know, when someone stops you and you take the trouble to sort of have a chat, you get so much more back. And you know, Heather was telling me that her husband again was a Ford fanatic. We were talking about some of the cars that he had owned, from Mk2 Cortinas. In fact, she was saying his Mk2 Cortina had a column change, which must have made it very rare. I don't think I've ever seen one with a column change. But yeah, when you own an old car, you become part of a community, and your car doesn't have to be 50, 60 years old to be a classic. You know, my view is that you know, modern cars can be classics. Frankly, if you love them and cherish them, and they're interesting to you and you're happy to share them with other people, I think that's just great. And I'm very conscious of the fact that getting into classic car ownership, you know, when we talk about classics like, you know, cars from the 70s and 60s, you know, it's expensive. They're expensive to buy. They can be expensive to maintain. And as a movement, we need to embrace young people like Vanessa, because there's a lot we can learn from them. And you know, when I got my first Triumph, you know, I considered it a classic. It was 20 years old. It was a Triumph Vitesse like this. But I can remember other classic car enthusiasts sort of looking down their noses at me, thinking, well, it's not a classic, it's only 20 years old. And I was a young man then. I was only 18, 19, and you know, to me, my first car was everything. So I think we should be much more inclusive, you know, and particularly at classic car shows. Let's bring younger people on board. For God's sake, we need young people to be enthusiastic, because before long we're not going to have anyone with the skills to maintain these cars for us, you know, whether it's doing bodywork, welding, or frankly rebuilding engines and gearboxes. So yeah. The village we're coming into now is called Framsden, and we're relatively high up by Suffolk standards, and you can tell that because I fear you're not going to be able to see this, but there's a windmill off to my left, and obviously mills always find themselves at the top of the village, or at the highest point. And Suffolk is blessed with quite a number of windmills, but it also has some water mills as well. And of course, where you find the windmills at the top of the village, you find the water mills at the bottom where the rivers are. But Helmingham, the village is all part of the Helmingham estate, and local classic car enthusiasts will know the Helmingham car show, which is held in August each year. But the estate was owned by the Tollimash family, who still own it, and there's a magnificent house. The house isn't open to the public, I don't think, but the gardens certainly are, and worth having a look at. And some of these little cottages you can see are former estate workers' cottages, very pretty. These again all date back to the 19th century, but they demonstrate a degree of care on the part of the estate owners, that you know, they wanted their workers, you know, their farm labourers, to have a decent place to live and to be a part of a community. And yeah, this is a good example of that. What I was saying earlier about having empty roads and being able to drive fast is usually true. However, we've just picked up a grain lorry, and so we're trundling along at 30 miles an hour here, but it's fine. 30 miles an hour on a day like today is just fine. If the smoke shows on the camera, it's from a bonfire, it's not from the car. Yeah, that wouldn't be good news if it was from the car, and I'd have moved faster than you've ever seen if it had been the car. Grabbed the fire extinguisher. Yeah, that's another good tip. Always carry a fire extinguisher with you. Go off left here, we'll leave the grain lorry to its own devices. Not the only convertible today. I've got a friend of mine who has a couple of old Fords. He's got a 1958 Anglia, and I can never remember the serial number. So it's not the 105E. It's the one before that, which sort of looks pretty much shares the same body shell as the Prefect. So he's got that one, and then he's got a 105E Anglia as well, and he loves these cars. But he was telling me he never drives further than Ipswich. In fact, he has never driven them further than Ipswich, which from where he lives is only about 20 miles. And he was saying that he loves the cars, but he's afraid to drive them out because he's afraid they won't be reliable and they'll break down. And it was quite interesting because I asked him how often they had broken down, and of course when we got into it we discovered that neither of them had ever actually let him down. He'd never broken down on the roadside, and so this idea of them being unreliable was sort of more of a fear than a reality for him. And I thought it was a bit of a shame, because I thought, well, you know, yeah, old cars will let you down. You know, modern cars will too. But I think you have to be prepared to take the risk. And what I find is that the more they're used, the better they are. And in fact, they are at their most unreliable when they've been sort of stood for any length of time. You know, most of the problems that I tend to have with the Triumphs is usually at the end of February, beginning of March, when, you know, they've been in the garage or undercover because, you know, the roads have been salted, and then you're trying to sort of you know, bring them back to life. And that's when they're really at their sort of kind of most truculent. But when they're used every day, you know, everything seems to sort of bed in nicely, and it's all lubricated, and it works. But I would, maybe I've just been lucky, but I would just hate to be in a situation where I was, you know, in love with this old car, but afraid to actually use it for the purpose for which it was designed. Equally, I've got another friend who's got a Triumph Herald, which is absolutely beautiful, and he's not afraid to use his car because it will break down. I mean, it's been completely restored, but he's sort of afraid to put mileage on it and to, you know, get paint chips and to damage it. He's got it to such a high level that he feels that you know, any time he takes it out, all he's going to do is sort of reduce the quality of the car. And I'm not even sure it's about, you know, affecting the value. I don't think that's what it's about. But he doesn't want the car to deteriorate. And I get that. When I first got Tess, my 2 litre, she was almost in concourse condition, and she only had 48,000 miles on her, which I later discovered was not an accurate mileage, but we'll come to that on another time perhaps. But I used to be frightened of taking her out, because I thought, well, every mile I do is, you know, diminishing the car because I'm adding to its mile. You know, every time I drove down a road, if I heard a stone underneath, I'd worry about, you know, the paint being chipped. And it came to a point where I had to make a decision. I either had to preserve her and just use her for shows, in which case I would only ever use her for 6 months of the year, and I'd only ever drive her from my house to a showground where I'd park up in a grassy field for 4 hours, or I could just accept that she was going to get battle scars, that she was going to get worn, but we were going to use her, we were going to drive her, and we were going to have, you know, loads of fun. And for the first year or two I vacillated, you know, one minute thinking, oh, I'll really use her, and then she get a paint chip, and I think, oh no, I can't, I'll have to you know, sort of wrap her up in cotton wool and, you know, not do that again. And in the end I just decided that driving was more fun than showing, and I love going to car shows, and I love taking her and showing her, but I get a certain pride in sort of saying to people, well, no, she's not perfect, but, you know, I did 5,000 miles in her last year. You know, we went to Nottingham, we've been all over Lincolnshire and Norfolk. You know, she's been out in the rain. And I have all those memories of the drives to look back on. And you know, I have lots of lovely memories of the car shows we've been to, and lots of photographs, some of which you'll have seen on my channel, but the memories I really treasure are the ones when we used the car and we went somewhere. I'm also pretty good at cleaning them, and I go through the cars every year and do all the paint chips and really get into it. So they're constantly maintained, and obviously if you wash and wax your cars regularly, you spot these little things before they become an issue, and just, you know, get on them, and that's the way I tend to do it. Right, we're going to take a little diversion down this rural lane here. Oops. You're getting a real bit of rural Suffolk today. This is interesting. Right, I've got a little Fiat behind me, and I've got a lorry coming towards me, and just enough space to pull over. If you're paying attention, you'll have noticed I slowed down in order to pull in, and it looks like I was really paying attention and watching for that lorry coming. I've got to be honest, I slowed down because of a puddle, and I washed the car a couple of hours ago and I didn't want to get mud on it. It just turned out that was fortuitous, because if I hadn't done, one of us would have been backing up a long way. See, spring is here, the hedges are just starting to green up. They're getting that kind of almost velvet to them before the leaves really sort of break out fully. Aha! Well, the road I wanted to go on is now closed, but that's okay. I'll go another way. Well, I hope you enjoyed this little drive out in Bess with me today, and what I really hope is that you know, this sort of little tour of the countryside persuade you to bring your own cars out and whether they're 1960s classics like this or early 2000 Mark V Volkswagens like Vitesses, or even something much newer. You know, come out and drive. Yeah, there are wonderful, wonderful roads here, wonderful climate, and a great community. Anyway, look forward to seeing you in a future video.